A woman named Glenda messaged me the other day where she had spent years doing everything her church asked her to do. She prayed faithfully, she guarded her boys from sin, she stayed vigilant. And she got to the end of all of it and realized she missed building Lincoln logs on the floor with her two boys. Now her boys are 25 and 28 years old now. Wonderful young men, but she'd give anything to go back and recover that time. Friend, that story is not a failure of faith. That story is what fear-based theology does to the human nervous system. And today, I'm going to show you exactly why. And we're going to dive into some neuroscience, church history, and one framework that I believe can change it. Welcome to the Shepherd's Tent. I'm your host, Mark Casto. This channel exists for anyone who is done performing. You are performing for God, you're performing for your family, you're performing at the church, you're performing on your job, and you're like, Mark, I'm just ready to be restored. Friend, if you found this video because you're exhausted, because something feels off about the pace that you're living at, because you love Jesus, but the version of him you were handed seems to be producing anxiety instead of peace, you are exactly in the right place. Now, I want to be clear. This is not a deconstruction conversation. I want to be upfront about that. We are not here tearing down the faith. What we are tearing down is all the stuff that got built on top of the actual faith that was never supposed to be there. Now, before we go any further, if you want a practical tool that goes with this teaching, I put together a free 4-page practical guide. I'm calling it the Rewired Morning. It's a 5-minute daily practice that starts the neurological rewiring process. It's what the Bible calls renewing the mind. If you want that, the link's in the description. Go get it, go experience it, come back and watch the rest of this. Let's go. So a few days ago, I posted something on Facebook, and it started really as just a commentary on an article that I read from Relevant Magazine about the neuroscience of encountering God. I wasn't expecting much, but it was intriguing to me because I had just gotten back from a gathering in Nashville where I went through a 4-day deal about inner healing, neuroscience, quantum physics. It was wild. So I was already intrigued. So I made this post just as a commentary on it, and guess what? This post goes viral. And again, I'm not going to get hung up in the numbers. All I can say is literally, I think over 1,500 people have shared this. Hundreds upon hundreds of thousands of people have read this article. People started reaching out to me from all over the world, and it was just really wild. But the statistic that really stuck out to me the most was that 92% of the people who saw it were not following me. They were complete strangers, people who had never heard of me, never heard of the Shepherd's Tent, and they stayed, they read it, they shared it, and then they started talking. Guys, the comment section became something I was not prepared for. People started sharing stories, and real ones and some really painful ones. But the article that started it all focused on the research of the neuroscientist named Andrew Newberg. And I believe he works at the Thomas Jefferson University. This man has literally spent 20 years doing something that sounds almost absurd when you say it out loud. He's been putting people in brain scanners while they pray. He's done this with Franciscan nuns, Buddhist monks, Pentecostal worshipers, people from all different traditions and backgrounds, and he's been watching in real time what happens inside the human brain when a person encounters what they believe to be God. And what he found is this: there is no single God spot in the brain. There's no isolated region that lights up and says, this is where religion lives. What Newberg found instead is that encountering God activates an entire network: emotion, memory, empathy, focus, all of it firing together, building over time what he describes as a neural map of a relationship that gets more defined and more powerful the more you engage it. Now, that alone is remarkable, but here's where it gets prophetic. The image of God that you bring into that encounter shapes everything about what happens neurologically. And when I say everything, I mean everything. Now, Newberg's research found that a fear-based image of God, which is one that's organized around punishment, wrath, and constant surveillance of your failures, keeps the brain's limbic system in a state of chronic activation. Now, for those of you that what the heck is the limbic system, okay? The limbic system is your brain's threat detection center. It's the part of your brain designed to keep you alive by constantly scanning for danger. Now, here's the problem. Your brain cannot tell the difference between a physical threat and a theological one. I'm going to say it again. Your brain cannot tell the difference between a physical threat and a theological one. So if your God is primarily a threat, your limbic system treats him like one. It never powers down, and it's constantly just staying on high alert. And the result? Anxiety, hypervigilance, emotional rigidity, chronic exhaustion, and a diminished capacity for the very things the gospel promises: peace, joy, rest, love. Now, I want to read a few of the comments from the post because I think they do more theological work than any framework I could build. And so again, I mentioned Glenda at the very beginning. She wrote this. She said, fear-based religion cost her enjoying her 2 boys when they were young. She was so worried about raising them right, keeping them sin-free, that she allowed fear-based religion to control her thoughts with worry and prayer and a service to a system. She was trained to keep her guard up, looking for the demons and evil in everything this world had to offer, and she played the protector role so efficiently that she honestly just missed the joy in raising them for several years. She said that this is one of the greatest regrets that she has in her life, and she can't get those years back when they were little. Her boys now are 25 and 28. Wonderful young men, amazing relationships, but she would give anything to go back and just build a Lincoln log house with them on the floor. Now, I want you to think about what I just said there. A woman who loves God with all of her guts, with everything she had, who was trying to be faithful, who was doing exactly what she was taught to do, and the system she trusted trained her so thoroughly to scan the atmosphere for threat that she couldn't be present in her own living room with her own children. Friend, I am tired. I'm so sick and tired of us calling that spiritual warfare. That's not spiritual warfare. That's what fear does to a human nervous system over time. Then there was a comment that really just blew me away. It stopped me cold in my tracks. Someone shared that their mother is now in a psychiatric facility. She was saved during the Jesus People movement, which would have been in the early 1970s, a sincere woman who just wanted to know God. But she spent 50 years absorbing doomsday prophecy and end times predictions and conspiracy content and constant demonic threat narratives by the demon hunters. And now her brain, after 5 decades of that kind of crap, is producing hallucinations. Dark shadows coming through the walls to attack her. And I know some of you are like, Mark, that's real demonic activity. I'm not the guy that sits here and acts like there's no such thing as demonic activity. But what I'm saying is we can so train our brains to see bad that we open ourselves up to hallucination. Now, the person who wrote that comment said something that I haven't been able to shake. They said, this is what unnecessary suffering looks like. Golly, man. For a woman who only wanted to know Jesus better, but sat under horrible doctrine and teaching. I want you to feel the weight of that, because that's not an edge case. That's a trajectory. And there are people sitting in congregations all over America right now, watching this channel right now, who are 10 or 20 years into that same trajectory and don't know it yet. And then there was a man who wrote about an experience he had like 10 years ago of what he called a deeper hell, trying to clean himself up from being a filthy rag, trying to perform his way into righteousness that the gospel says was already given to him. Friend, I could just go on story after story, hundreds of comments, and these are not isolated stories. This is a pattern, and the pattern has a name. You ready? Fear-based religion. Fear-based religion doesn't just shape your theology. It gets into your body. It restructures your nervous system. It rewires your brain around threat. And then it literally calls that rewiring spiritual maturity. And that's dangerous. So how did we get here? Because these weren't evil people building these systems. Most of them are truly sincere believers. Most of them genuinely loved God. So where did a religion built on the announcement that God so loved the world end up producing anxiety and shame and neurological damage in the people who followed it most faithfully? Well, the answer is actually historical and it's very important. So lock in with me. The Western Church's understanding of God has been shaped for centuries by a legal retributive framework. Now, let me trace that for you real quickly. It starts with Anselm of Canterbury in the 11th century. Anselm developed what became known as the satisfaction theory of atonement. God's honor had been offended by human sin, and that offense required a payment of equal or greater value. So God sent his son to satisfy the debt. Now, I want you to notice something about this kind of framework of thinking. The primary driver of the cross in Anselm's theology is not love, it's honor. It's a legal transaction. God's honor demands satisfaction, and the cross provides it. Then you go to Calvin in the 16th century, who takes that framework and sharpens it further into what we call penal substitution. God's justice requires punishment for sin. So Jesus takes the punishment in our place, and the wrath of God is satisfied. Now, I am not by any means dismissing the cross. The cross is everything. But notice what image of God these frameworks produce when they become the primary lens. A God whose primary concern is his own honor and justice. A God who required a payment before he would ever extend grace. A God who is fundamentally oriented toward punishment until a transaction changes his posture towards you. Think about that. When you think about that, that God is not the God of Psalm 23. He is not the father running down the road in Luke 15 to the prodigal son. He is not the shepherd leaving the 99 to go after the one. And when you preach that gospel consistently for 5 centuries, it produces exactly what we're seeing in the comment section. People are exhausted from trying to satisfy a debt that was already paid. Now, I know some of you are sitting there with a question, and I want to address it directly. Well, Mark, what about sin? And what about the fear of the Lord? And what about Proverbs 9:10 that says that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom? I know some of you are even wondering, are you saying that sin doesn't matter, Mark? No, absolutely not. Sin is real. The cross was necessary. Repentance is not a suggestion. Nobody in this conversation is arguing otherwise. But there is a difference between the reality of sin and sin consciousness as sustained psychological posture. One is biblical anthropology. The other is a coping mechanism that religion institutionalized and called it discipleship. Now, the writer of Hebrews makes his distinction explicit. He says that under the old covenant, the repeated sacrifices actually served as a constant reminder of sin. The system was literally designed in the Old Covenant to keep the worshiper aware of their failure because it could never actually deal with sin at the root. It could only cover it temporarily. And then he says that Jesus, through one sacrifice, accomplished what the entire sacrificial system could not. And the designed outcome, the intended result of the finished work of the cross, is a worshiper who no longer has a sin consciousness as their primary orientation. Not a worshiper who never sins, not a worshiper who doesn't care about righteousness, a worshiper whose primary identity is no longer defined by what they've done wrong. And on the fear of the Lord, the Hebrew word in Proverbs 9:10 for the fear of the Lord doesn't mean terror. It means awe. It means reverence. The overwhelming sense of standing in the presence of something so vast and so good that it undoes you and rebuilds you at the same time. Now, I want you to think about the difference between a child who obeys their father because they're terrified of punishment, or a child who honors their father because they've experienced his love so deeply that disappointing him becomes unthinkable. Now, same behavior outcome on the surface, completely different neurological and relational reality underneath. One produces trauma, the other produces transformation. And guys, that's the distinction the church has lost, and recovering it changes everything. So what does the other side look like? What does a love-based theology actually produce in the brain and in the life of a leader? Newberg's research is clear. A love-based image of God, one organized around goodness and nearness and compassion, which I don't think nearness is the best word because we are actually in him and he is in us, but I get what he's saying. That when you base it on goodness and nearness and compassion, it produces measurably different neurological outcomes. Greater resilience. I read this in the article. It says deeper empathy, reduced anxiety and depression. I thought this one was really interesting and fascinating. It literally said that when you base it off a love-based image of God, it produces a genuine capacity to trust. And I love this one too. The ability to rest without guilt. That's a big one. And that makes sense because when we go back to the book of Romans chapter 2, verse 4, it says it plainly here. It is the kindness of God that leads men to repentance. Not his wrath, not his disappointment, his kindness. And when I say that, when I start talking about beloved identity and kindness and goodness, people's like, oh, Mark, that's just a soft theology. Friend, that is not a soft theology. That is the design of the human brain agreeing with the nature of God. If you just look at the life of David, the greatest warrior in all of Israel, a man who faced real enemies, real battles, real darkness, real failure, and when he wanted to tell you what actually sustained him, he didn't write a warfare manual. He wrote Psalm 23. The Lord is my shepherd. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside the still waters. He restores my soul. Guys, the most powerful warrior of the Old Testament sustained himself through rest and the presence of God and the restoration of his interior world. Not through threat awareness, through shepherd focus. Now, here's a practical thing that I want to give you before we close. Something that you can start tomorrow morning. Before you check your phone, before you ever open an email, before you look at the news or your metrics or your to-do list, I want you to spend 5 minutes doing one thing. Just think about the goodness of God toward you specifically. Not your theology about God, not your ministry goals, not your failures from yesterday, just his goodness aimed toward you, okay? Now listen, please don't look at this like, okay, Mark's trying to give us a new devotional practice, okay? It is that, but it's more than that. It's actually neurological rewiring. You are literally training your brain's reticular activating system to orient toward love before it has a chance to orient toward threat. And if you will do that consistently, watch what changes in your day-to-day life. Not just spiritually, in your physical body, in your relationships, in your capacity to lead. Guys, I put the full version of this practice in a free guide called the Rewired Morning. It walks you through all 3 steps with the science behind each one. The link's in the description below. Go get it right now. Now, I want to close with this. Every one of you has a vineyard within. When I say that word vineyard within, I'm talking about your interior world. I'm talking about your heart. I'm talking about the soul care of a man, okay? The vineyard within is the most important territory you will ever tend. Not your platform, not your numbers, not your next launch. The interior life of a leader, of a person, is the headwaters of everything that flows out of you. And the Good Shepherd has been waiting patiently without a single ounce of disappointment. Listen, without a single ounce of disappointment for you to stop managing the perimeter and come sit beside the still waters for a while. Guys, it's there that he restores the soul. And that's not a metaphor, and it's a promise for you. Guys, this is our first episode. I'm actually going to do 6 of these in total. So this is episode 1 of 6 in a series I'm calling Rewired, Breaking the Neurology of Fear-Based Faith. So next week, we're going to jump into episode 2, and we're going to go deeper into the 1,000-year theological history that literally built the fear-based God. And I'm going to break it down for you under the weight of the actual gospel. Now listen, if this conversation is what you've been looking for, I want you to hit that subscribe button. Hit the bell. Every episode in this series builds on the last one, and you don't want to miss where this is going. And if you're ready to go deeper than a YouTube series, I want to tell you about the Shepherd's Tent Partner Community. Guys, this is where we live inside of this material every single week. So whether you're somebody trying to come out of fear-based religion, maybe you're a pastor trying to get out of fear-based religion, entrepreneur, businessman, teacher, doesn't matter, entrepreneurs, whoever you are, and you're done performing and you're ready to be restored, I want you to jump in that community. The link is also in the description for that. Guys, I'll see you next time here at the Shepherd's Tent.